Spartacus, a husband, a gladiator, a slave, and an absolute
dog.
Spartacus not only escaped the Romans that enslaved him, he then assembled an army of gladiator avengers and almost ended Rome. I mean, the guy was a straight up
Down!
Seriously, Spartacus, the last Rome bender, took Rome, bent it over, and said,
I put some lube on and got him on his knees.
In fact, Spartacus clapped those Roman cheeks so hard that to this day we call the Spartacus uprising the clapping of 72 BCE, which might have you wondering, is it really necessary that I do yet another video about Spartacus, a dude that's been dissected and analyzed for 2 millennia? Yes.
Super necessary.
Spartacus was born a Thracian in present-day Bulgaria sometime in 103 BCE, and that's it. That's all we know. Anyone who tells you anything more than that doesn't really know and is just trying to sound smart, making statements. All we know for sure is that at some point Spartacus fought as an auxiliary in the Roman army, which is just a fancy way to say the Romans didn't really respect him enough because he was a Thracian, which to them was basically an uneducated barbarian, so he fought in the army forces reserved for non-Roman foreigners, aka the auxiliary forces. The forces that the Romans hated, but they needed their power in their army. It was kind of like,
I pure, straight, hate you. But god damn it, do I respect you.
So with that level of disrespect, Spartacus, he was like,
Ain't nobody got time for that.
and he deserted the hell out of that army. Too many rules, too much discrimination. This wasn't the life this Thracian's crystal girl wife foresaw for him, and I'm not being insulting or funny. He really had a crystal girl as a wife, you know, back when he was free in Thrace, and his girl smoked that good and read some cards or stones or crystals or whatever they read, and had dreams of her husband and a snake, which that's either some real weird kink that would turn this video R-rated with a quickness, or, as she interpreted it, it meant that her husband was destined for greatness. Destined for greatness had a nice ring to it, so Spartacus believed his wife, and for the rest of his life, he was low-key waiting for that prophecy to fulfill itself, but there was no greatness to be found in the Roman army. The only thing Spartacus found there was Roman discipline, and an intimate knowledge of how the Roman legions are structured and operate, which would prove useful later in his life when he played against the Romans online in Call of Duty, which he could afford because he got it for cheap on instant gaming, thanks to them constantly having discounts on all his favorite games, be it on PS4 or 5 or Xbox X or S or any of the letters from the X alphabet. PC, man, name any system you can think of. No, really, name a gaming system, any, like, what do you own? What are you thinking of?
It doesn't matter what you think!
Because instant gaming has games for it cheaper. Search the latest game, check the price anywhere on the web, then check it on instant gaming. Do it.
Do it.
I dare you.
I double dare you!
The games are code only, no physical copy, but that's essentially the same as downloading a game from the PlayStation Store or Steam or any store. Literally the same, just cheaper. All legal, all originals, no resales, no cracked versions, no restrictions on the multiplayer night, and none of that. And when it seems too good to be true, it is actually in the link in my description, so click that and head over to Instant Gaming, or I will brand you a deserter and hunt you down like the Romans did after Spartacus left the army. And some say Spartacus then became a bandit to support himself, but details are really sparse on that, and that could just be the Romans trying to slander his name after the fact. We don't really know. What we do know is that after he left the army, Spartacus was then quickly captured by his former brothers in arms and sold into slavery, which is incredibly ironic, because Spartacus was already fed up with all the rules he had to follow in the Roman military, so he deserted his post, only to find himself forced into the life of a gladiator slave.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Specifically, Spartacus was sold to the gladiatorial school owner Lentulus Batiatus in Capua, and once he was there, we don't really know what happened. We don't. Think about it. It's not like Rome made it a point to document the stories of literally irrelevant slaves. They had bigger things to do, like growing the Roman Empire. So Spartacus' time as a gladiator would have been like all the other gladiators in Rome, and anyone who gives you any glorious, juicy details about his time as a gladiator is once again just lying, making statements. But there's the show Spartacus, which does a really good job at filling in those blanks. So I highly recommend that. And also, rest in peace, Andy Whitfield. Once he was a gladiator, it didn't take long for Spartacus to feel his inner Deserticus coming through again. He had to escape this situation because there was still that snake-related greatness his wife foretold him, and this gladiator life sure wasn't it. So in 73 BCE, Spartacus and his gladiator bro Crixus convinced 200 of their fellow gladiator bros to escape the gladiator school, and over 70 of them actually made it out alive after overcoming the guards with nothing but kitchen knives. Once those 70 gladiators were free, the former slaves made it all the way to Mount Vesuvius, where they set up camp to plan their next move. And remember, as I said earlier, Rome at the time, bigger fish to fry than about 70 random no-name slaves playing Lord of the Flies on the mountain. So Rome just sent some wuss praetor named Glaber to take care of Spartacus with about 3,000 men. And Glaber figured he could just lay siege to Spartacus and his slaves by blocking the one and only path off Mount Vesuvius and starve them out. Problem was that on their way to Mount Vesuvius, Spartacus and the rebels had found like-minded people and significantly increased their numbers, and so while the loser praetor Glaber set siege to the mountain's only path in the cover of the night, Spartacus and his men used the mountain's vines like ropes to climb off of the side and attack the sleeping and unprepared Roman camp, killing many of Glaber's men and taking off with their equipment and supplies. The first victory for Spartacus and his men, and thanks to the new equipment, supplies, and the gained confidence that comes with newfound glory, it was also a battle that actually ended up making them stronger than they were before. Kind of like a saying. Spartacus and his rebels leveled up from being random no-name slaves to being random no-name slaves that had embarrassed Rome, which decidedly made that embarrassment all the more embarrassing, while also decidedly making them less no-name. The name Spartacus started making the rounds around Rome, which, not unlike us today, loved nothing more than gossip, more than we do now actually, because no TV, no social media, slander and word of mouth was life, and it gave Spartacus and the rebellion life. They became an inspiration for all other slaves, which was kind of a major problem because about a fourth of Italy at the time were slaves, and now these guys had hopes and dreams. That meant that many of the slaves flocked to Spartacus's rebellion, as did unhappy citizens and underpaid soldiers. They all went and joined Spartacus as he went from village to village, where him and his army were a nightmare for the rich, whose houses and farms they raided while liberating their slaves and their forced labor, all the while amassing not just more manpower, but also wealth and supplies. And all in all, Spartacus' rebellion was going pretty well.
Life is good. You know what I mean?
Spartacus's army grew, and his past military experience in the Roman army allowed him to efficiently train these men that joined him, while it also meant he knew exactly how a Roman legion would operate in trying to stop him. So even though Rome now took Spartacus more seriously, this group of former slaves turned rebels had become serious guerrilla warriors that managed to ambush and defeat the next legion Rome sent their way, and then stole their equipment and their horses. So once again, like a saying, with every battle, Spartacus and his people ended up being stronger than they were before. At this point, Spartacus and the gang were so popular and so big that they were no longer just raiding farms. They occupied and liberated entire villages, using them as home bases to trade and forge weapons. You could say that the rebellion was now kind of an army nation. At its largest point, there were 120,000 people under Spartacus's command, which, for reference, that's 3 times the population of Monaco today. Which is a terrible reference, because I don't think many of us have been to Monaco, because
I'm broke, baby. I ain't got no money.
So for better comparison, Rome at the time only had a population of roughly 900,000 to 1 million people, as much as those figures can be trusted. So 120,000 to Spartacus' name is a lot. Spartacus and his slaves were an enemy army living and thriving within the Roman territory, and what started as 70-something slaves escaping a gladiator school turned into a rebellion larger than whatever seemed possible, so large that it also outgrew realistic expectations of what actually is possible, and Spartacus's right-hand man Crixus fell victim to that grandeur. While Spartacus wanted to leave Rome via the Alps, cross into Gaul territory and secure freedom for himself and the people that followed him, Crixus was high on their successes and started to feel invincible. He could not forgive nor forget what Rome did to him, and he wanted to keep pillaging Roman territories, slay Roman soldiers and slavers, make them pay for all the sins they committed. In essence, Crixus wanted to free more and more slaves to eventually take down Rome itself. A tall task, even with all the success they'd had. Spartacus knew that Rome had not yet hit them with all they had to offer, but he could not make his right-hand man see reason, which meant that eventually Crixus's ambition split the rebellion in half. Crixus took 35,000 fighting men with him and marched south towards Rome. Rome at this point had long realized that Spartacus had to be stopped, no matter the cost. So in the spring of 72 BCE, they sent the largest force yet to do just that. And of course, Crixus marching south marched right into that force, who were ready to face all of Spartacus's might. So the small army that Crixus led right into their arms was an easy victory for Rome. They killed them all. They killed Crixus, and they finally got some swagger back. Rome was back in the winning bracket. And also now they were able to follow the path that Crixus used to get away from Spartacus. They followed that path to close in on Spartacus, coming at him from two sides by splitting their Roman forces in half. And when they finally did close in on Spartacus, with overwhelming weapons and equipment, Roman discipline, high on the success of killing Crixus and his men and ready to stop Spartacus once and for all, then and there, when Spartacus finally clashed with a prepared Roman army. The battle that followed was probably epic. We don't know. we really don't. We do know that Spartacus somehow defeated the two Roman armies surrounding him, somehow overcame their advantages against ridiculous odds by some sort of genius outmaneuvering them and all, but really, Rome wasn't about to detail this embarrassment, so there aren't any reliable written records of it. All we know is that Spartacus somehow made the impossible possible and won. And anyone that tries to tell you that they know the exact details of how Spartacus pulled that off, anyone who tries to sell you these details, they're once again just lying, making statements. Despite Spartacus winning against Rome once again, Crixus' splitting of the army and his defeat was the beginning of the end for the rebellion. But still, leader Spartacus was devastated by the loss of his right-hand man, of his former gladiator brother Crixus, and he honored his fallen brother by making many of the hundreds of Roman war prisoners he held captive compete in gladiator games and kill each other for the entertainment of the former slaves they used to make fight.
Well. How the turntables...
Then, what happened next is another great mystery, because at this point, Spartacus was up in the north, and he could have finally crossed the Alps and gotten away from Rome's grasp for good. He could follow through on his original plan and lead everybody to safety, to start a new chapter in their life, but he never did. For some reason, Spartacus decided to turn south, pillage and fight all the way through to Italy's shores, where he was planning to sail to Sicily with 2,000 of his men to spark a Sicilian slave revolution and increase his army's numbers to, we don't know, to probably attack Rome or create an independent nation within its borders. We really don't know, but whatever the plan was, it was a far cry from Spartacus's original and very sound plan to escape via the Alps and actually achieve freedom and live. Now it seemed like Spartacus was willing to fight the almost impossible battle that Crixus already fell victim to. Maybe he caved to the pressure of the men in his army wanting to pillage and loot Rome? Maybe him and his men just grew overconfident. Maybe they felt the need to send a message and get revenge after Crixus' death. Whatever the case, Spartacus and his people marched back towards Rome, while Rome sent Marcus Licinius Crassus towards them to finally put an end to their uprising. Now, you have to know that Crassus was the richest man in all of Rome at the time, but not necessarily their best general. That honor would go to Pompey, but Pompey was still out fighting the wars that were Rome's priority and not back to deal with the Spartacus rebellion just yet. So after all these failures to defeat Spartacus, Crassus was now Rome's best bet. And after all these failures, defeating Spartacus would give Crassus the military glory that he was so desperately looking for. It would allow him to be more than just Rome's richest man. So Crassus, once he got that mission, man, he was coming in hot. He used 6 of his own legions and 2 of the legions from the previous failed attempts to stop Spartacus, and the first thing he did to his troops was decimation. From his total of 8 legions, which is just under 50,000 soldiers in general, 1 out of 10 soldiers was randomly chosen to be beaten to death by the other 9. That is decimation, and using decimation, Crassus made sure his troops feared him more than they feared Spartacus.
Fear is stronger than love. Remember that. Fear is stronger than love.
So the troops came at the rebel slaves of Spartacus with a chip on their shoulder. Spartacus, meanwhile, did successfully make his way to the coast of Sicily, but he was betrayed by the pirates he had arranged a deal with. They were meant to give him safe passage and sail him over to the island to start his planned slave revolution there and amass more troops, but they were pirates, so they kind of did what pirates do. They took his money, they stole his money, and ran. So now Spartacus was stuck with his back against the coast, against the water, with Crassus closing in on the coast. Spartacus had nowhere to go. A battle against what, at this point, was the best Rome could offer was inevitable. But of course, there's a reason we still talk about Spartacus to this day. On the day of the battle against Crassus, against impossible odds, Spartacus unleashed an inner power that is still mysterious and studied by historians and scientists alike today. Spartacus unleashed that power, and history remembers the man cutting through dozens of Roman centurions until he made it to Crassus himself, tore his head off barehanded, and then declared that the very land this battle took place on, this blood was spilled on, this land shall now forever be known as Sparta, the warrior nation forged in Spartacus's name and spirit. No, I'm just messing with you. That never happened. This battle between Crassus and his 8 legions, fully organized, digging trenches and coming in well fed and prepared on all kinds of momentum, their battle against Spartacus's weary and tired rebels, man, it was
Not even close.
Spartacus and his people got whooped in this battle of 71 BCE, and to scare anyone out of the idea of ever rebelling against Rome again, 6,000 of Spartacus's men were crucified along the Appian Way. As for Spartacus himself, Rome was obviously more than eager to make an example of him, drag him through the streets, humiliate his body, humiliate his remains, humiliate his memory. But after the battle, Spartacus's body was never found, and it was only recently discovered that Spartacus did in fact escape the battle and went on to participate in a secret super serum program that would give him the power to avenge his fallen brothers, to become a man forever known as Captain No, of course not, man. Spartacus just probably got taken away by some of his buddies and was buried somewhere in secret. Spartacus was no more, and his rebellion was over. But while the man might be dead, legends live forever.